right, we will call the March 21st Economic Development Plan Review Committee meeting to order. And we'll begin with the roll call.
Blessum,
Here.
Feldner, Hammer,
Here.
Howe, Neither,
Yes.
Nelson,
Here.
Pittner.
Okay, we do have a quorum. We're missing a couple members. One thing to note as we get further in is as we're bringing motions and getting things done on our draft report, we'll still have a chance to review those when we have hopefully the entire committee here, because I want to make sure we get all the perspectives. Everybody's put the time in, but I also don't want to lose ground either. So we'll go ahead and move forward today. We do have a quorum to get that done. So next we'll move to the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we will approve the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the February 21st meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion on the minutes? All right, we'll call the roll.
Hammer,
Yes.
Neither,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Blessum.
Yes. Okay, on to new business. We're going to get an update from the Child Care Committee. Alderwoman Lisa Olson is here, so welcome, Alderwoman. Thanks for coming to talk to us. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. It's a little different to be on this side of the dais, so I'm going to learn some things today, I guess. And I'm not the only one here from our committee. Scott Burlingame and Kelly Roselli Sullivan are also joining us, and we're going to tag team this brief presentation for you today. Let's see if I can do this right. So, who are we and why do we exist? We started meeting in 2023 to address the needs and to discuss solutions for the lack of childcare in Minot. Our committee is made up of a variety of people. We have parents, business owners, childcare providers. We have a new member who will be representing the military. We have licensing professionals that work directly with childcares, HR experts, city staff, and elected officials. So we have a pretty broad variety of committee members. So, as we have met, what have we learned? We learned that there's a distinct need for childcare, and I think we knew that going into it. I don't know that we fully realized how distinct that need was, and particularly for infants, and we'll talk about that again in a little bit. We have heard anecdotally from parents and from child care providers that it is nearly impossible to find a spot for an infant. There's a little bit more flexibility as children get to be 4 or 5 years old, but infants is very difficult. And we know that this directly impacts our workforce, which ultimately impacts economic development growth in and around Minot. So I'm going to ask Scott to come up, and he's going to tell you some kind of sobering things that we did discover.
Hi, everybody. Just for full disclosure, my name is Scott Burlingame, and while I was serving on council, I had the opportunity to help kind of get this group going and have had the opportunity to remain with it since that time. As Lisa talked about, one of the realities that we deal with is about that 3 to 5 year waiting list when it comes to getting childcare. It's extraordinarily long, and so many stories that we've talked about is people that want to move to this community and work, and when they find that out, they can't do it. We've talked to employers who have said, we found these employees for these hard to fill jobs, and they accepted the job, they were planning on moving here, they found out how long these wait lists are, they've turned it down and chose to stay in the community they came from, and the real long-term economic development or impacts of that. And we're talking good, well-paying jobs. The school staffs are impacted when our schools, talking to both the college and the school systems, problems with hiring professionals as well, trying to get people for those oftentimes hard to fill positions. Parents staying home instead of working, causing workforce issues. I can't tell you the number of parents I talked to that said, I mean, it's totally noble and acceptable if a parent chooses to stay at home, but when a parent wants to enter the workforce, when parents need to enter the workforce for economic reasons, but they can't, not only because they can't afford childcare, but because they cannot find that availability. So employers who have, mothers who leave the workforce and during maternity leave, and then they want to come back, and then they're getting to, not 6 weeks, not 12 weeks, but months and months of time where they try to get through that waiting list, and employers being forced to hold that job open, or choosing to hold that job open, or having to choose between, moving on, and how difficult that is. Businesses that are altering their hours just for the purposes of childcare, having a hard time staying open, being able to serve the public because of these issues. And then the military, medical, first responders across the board for non-traditional hours. One of the interesting things was talking to military families and talking to different members of the base about how it affects military readiness when parents can't leave their children because they do not have childcare, and how much of an impact that is on all of that. And it was definitely, before I began this adventure, not something I had thought about so much, but it's weirdly, childcare is kind of a national security issue when you're dealing with some of the jobs that we have, and same with our first responders. And you're all aware, of course, of problems with our police force and our fire department on filling those hard to fill jobs, and how important that is. Okay, so I got this little thing here, see what I can screw up. Okay, good. Area success stories. So one of the things that we did spend a lot of time on was looking at what are some of the things happening throughout our region regarding childcare, and what has worked and what hasn't worked, and sort of what the purposes behind what they did, and what tools did they possibly use to do that. We had a lot of conversation with the Wells Fargo Economic Development folks, and they really did sort of maybe we'll call it more of a shotgun type approach, where they tried to serve as many different child cares as possible, and trying to offer sort of micro or mini grants to help out. So say if a child care needed a freezer to kind of level up in the child care world, that they would offer up some grants using economic development dollars for that. And so they really took this wide approach to try to serve as many different people as possible. Sort of on the flip side of that, with a less wide approach but a bigger economic approach, is Watford City. And Watford City, to the best of my knowledge, if I remember correctly, used Hub City funding in order to actually build a child care building, a facility. And then went back a few years later and built a second one. And we're talking about millions of dollars of investments, then finding a nonprofit to run that large facility. And they really viewed the child care issue as a infrastructure issue. And that if we want people to live in our community, if we want people to work in our community, we have to be able to solve this problem. An example we had here that was kind of a fun thing that should be opening soon is a public-private partnership between Minot State University and the Midwest Montessori School. I drive by that every day on my way home and kind of see that progress coming along. That's going to have the ability to kind of have that a private company operating within a public, near the public school on public property, but being able to kind of partner on a piece of land that wasn't being previously used. And the other thing that we talked a lot about, and even though we're in the middle of the 2025 legislative session, but the 2023 legislative session, the state legislature put forward millions and millions of dollars towards this issue. And we try to do our best in order to allow folks in Minot to understand what those are, to allow employers to know, to allow prospective child care providers to know, and to allow current child care providers to kind of know how to bring some of those millions of dollars into our community to make the best use of solving the problems here. So, okay, Lisa.
So when we first started meeting, really our purpose was to find out information and to get discussion rolling. We heard from different people some of the issues that they were seeing, but we felt that it was important at a city level to have those discussions. So we felt that that has been a success. I'm going to skip point number 2, and then I'll call Kelly up in just a minute. But some things that we could be considering in the future would be a part of economic development. We're not asking for the city to solve all of the child care issues. We know that that isn't feasible or just the right way to go. But we want to have the city consider being part of some solutions. And one thing could be that we could, and this is through Century Code, municipalities are allowed to exempt property taxes from child care centers. So that would be something that we could consider. that will be part of an upcoming committee meeting, and I'm sure that it will come before the council in the not-too-distant future. And we feel it's very important to continue the discussion with our legislators. As Scott alluded to, there was a lot of forward movement in support for childcare in the 2023 session, and it has not been quite as popular in the 2025 session. And we're really unclear as to why, because the need is still there. We do know that some of the funds that were allocated in 2023 had not been used, and we felt that that was partially due to the fact that information wasn't made available to all the people that needed it. So we just know that that conversation needs to continue. So one thing that we did was partner with MAC EDC to create a childcare resource guide. And Kelly's going to come up and she's going to tell you a little bit about that guide. And we hope that that will be a resource that's available to a lot of people.
Oh, thank you.
I'm good. I have multiple online copies.
You don't. Okay. All right. So we felt like this was kind of low-hanging fruit to help parents, to help providers and potential providers. And that would be a one-stop shop with all the information. This is PDF form, obviously, but it will be housed on our website as an issue document, digital, and that way we can be able to track the metrics on it, on who's actually going to the site and perusing through the guide itself. But the first part of it, a lot of the information was taken mostly from the state of North Dakota, Department of Human Services, but how they just don't share it out there well enough, and we want to make sure we do a better job of that. So the first portion is for parents and families on how to find it, how to ask questions, what are the right things to look for, what kind of center is most appropriate for your children. Also, how can I can't afford childcare, so what opportunities are out in the state to allow them to get assistance in helping pay for childcare. And then there's programs for the military, and then just questions in regards to childcare. And there's a site that you can go to where, who's in your area. So everybody put in your zip code, and it will list all the providers in that area. So, and then the second portion is for providers. So it gives them opportunities to get additional training. There's a program with the Women's Business Center in Bismarck that does a 10-week program. It's a weekly thing, and it focuses more on business-minded type of things. Not everybody opens a daycare really know how to, do QuickBooks or create a P&L or look at an income statement. So that program helps them with that. And then upon completion of the program, they get help from a couple of different entities for loans in the state with discount or lower interest rates. So that information is in there for them. Then for the last portion of it is for people to, if they're thinking about starting a childcare. So, where do you start? And it walks steps through that. And on the online version, like if you see anything that's in blue means it's a link. That's obviously you can't click on it in a PDF form, but that is in essence of what we put together. Then Lisa shared it out to the Child Care Committee to get feedback from the child care providers and anybody else on the committee who thought anything was missing. And we've compiled their suggestions and have added it into the resource guide. And we should be getting this live next week. Any questions?
Okay. Committee, any questions for the presenters?
I do have one quick question. So I did see You had said in the Century Code that we can exempt daycare providers from property taxes. Is that limited to centers, or would that go to in-home too?
Limited to centers.
Call it Brian.
Oh, okay.
Sure. Sorry.
Members of the committee, Ryan Komrowski, City Assessor, that is limited to centers only. We cannot, any property that's not a residence is how it states
Sure.
in Century Code.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
So, yes, Lisa. Is there, if I wanted to open a daycare in my home, is there any restrictions to me? I mean, can I say, do I have to be licensed? I mean, I understand people probably are looking for a licensed daycare as when they're looking for a daycare, but could I open a daycare and have 15 kids in my house and be,
So I'm certainly not going to claim to be a licensing expert. We do have a licensing expert on our committee. Unfortunately, she's not here today. I believe you could, but I think the best route is to be a licensed provider, because then you would be eligible for some of the other benefits, some of the food programs and such. And so anyway, yes, I believe you could do it, but it's probably best to be licensed.
I agree with you, but do we have a lot of that situation in Minot where people they're running a daycare and they're not licensed and obviously being licensed, there's a lot of benefits to it, I understand that, but
You know, we haven't heard a lot of situations where there are unlicensed providers. I'm sure there are, and I guess I would think that it almost might be more of a situation where it's the grandma and grandpa daycare kind of thing, where, you know, spots aren't available in a licensed childcare, parents need the care, and so maybe it's family members or something like that that are caring for the children. Obviously, probably not charging them at that point either, but I think that's more the situation that we would run into.
okay. One more question, if I may. What does it cost to become licensed? If I wanted to open a daycare up and I wanted to get licensed, what kind of cost am I looking at?
And again, I don't have an answer to that. It's probably in that resource guide.
Okay.
I don't think that the cost is substantial. Again, from what we've heard from some of the providers, more of the issues for them have been finding staff. We know that the childcare providers, or excuse me, the workers in particular, you know, they work for very little. Their salaries or income is not very high. Those are some of the issues. You know, I'm sure that some of the expenses that you would be looking at, if it were not a home daycare, would be to get a facility that is up to code and that kind of thing. So I think that the costs can vary a lot. We see a lot of licensed centers in churches, and so sometimes those facilities lend themselves better to a larger center because they're set up for children in the first place. So again, I think it can just run a pretty wide variety of costs.
Okay, Jordan?
Just a quick clarification. I Googled your question because it was a question I had too. And you can have 5 children in your care or 3 under 2 years of age if you're unlicensed. So anything more than that, you have to be licensed in the state.
And I think like anything, you know, like in our business, we would always advise people go all of those routes because of liability reasons and all that stuff, right? But I think your question's a good one. That was my experience growing up. My mom wanted to be home, so she opened a home daycare, and we had 10 to 15 kids most of my childhood that were in our house, and I'm pretty sure she was never licensed. So you know, so I think that's there's a mentality that kind of comes with that. Michaela?
I will say, as a previous licensed provider, I don't know if there was any cost with the state to actually get licensed. You do have to open up your home quite a bit and quite often for them to come in and do inspections and to make sure the area is appropriate for children and for how many. There's a lot of paperwork, which is kind of hard and difficult to get through. But the benefit of it is you get a lot of funding. So like when I first opened, I applied for funding for, I think they provided tables, you know, where they're shorter tables for children. They gave you a certain amount in like art supplies, things like that, where you could go pick out from a book. And then if you're licensed, you also are eligible to apply for the funding for the food program so that you can plan out your meals and get reimbursed for some of that. So there is a benefit to being licensed, but you do have to open up your home. And I believe there's multiple checks throughout your first year.
And I guess one other thing that came to my mind, and Harold, we don't have any of the zoning folks, I don't know if you know it. Do we have anything in zoning that you remember that starts to limit this at some point? Because I don't think, it doesn't seem logical that we would just allow, hey, 15 kids to show up in any one random residential house. I think at some point, zoning wise, we would care about that.
There's a limit in the maximum, and I think it is 15. I think statewide average is 12, and we exceed that by allowing 15. But then we also have to deal with other matters like being a good fit for the neighborhood, those kinds of things. We do get complaints from neighbors at daycare, those kinds of things. And so that's why we have a lot of those rules and regulations, and there was significant presentation and discussion on that with the child care committee as well.
And parking is also an
Yeah,
issue.
yeah,
Neighbors
and
will have
just
some
traffic,
concerns about
right.
parking. But our committee has always had someone from, a zoning expert from the city, so they've been able to kind of give advice related to that as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
if I may, as we were going through the ordinance changes, we actually leaned on Ward County Social Services to kind of come up with that number, that 15 number, if I recall. So that's where that was derived from, their recommendation.
And so did we do that under home rule? Is that how we are different from the state, or was the state not a hard fast?
It's the limit isn't necessarily established in state law. We just, as we did the average of cities across the state, most of them had ordinances that limited to 12, and then we exceeded that based off of need, and 15 was about the max that we're willing to go through, I believe, by Tyler's recollection there and the process that went through that.
Makes sense.
So just one more point. I mean, the purpose in us being here today is not to necessarily talk specifics of childcare, because our committee has been doing a lot of that. But our point in presenting to you today is that we really do believe that economic development begins and ends with efficient childcare. If we don't have appropriate childcare, it affects everything that we do, whether it's workers in a restaurant or hotel, up to energy engineers, medical staff, military. It just impacts everyone. And so we feel that this is a facet of economic development that needs to be considered when we're making some of those decisions, because we just feel that we don't get away from childcare issues and still maintain good economic development practices.
So one thing, and that's kind of a good segue into where I wanted to go, Alderwoman Olson. The thing that's always interesting to me is when you have an environment like this where, to me, there's an incredible amount of demand, right? Like if we're saying 3 to 5 year waiting lists, like, well, my kids grew right out of daycare by the time I get off the waiting list. It doesn't even work, right? When there's that level of demand, how is it that our market is broken so much that we can't get people to want to join that market? Right? Like if there's people like my world, if I've got 20,000 people that want a tax return done, that level of demand, people want to jump in and meet that demand, right? So there's got to be something here inherent to this. And I know some of it, we have clients that do this. Some of it is staff, right? It's a very difficult thing to staff and to keep staff. You've got a ton of turnover. There's a lot of things that you need to do there. But are there other impediments? Have you guys gotten into some of that? Because that is where it starts to butt up on the economic development side to me. If that market is broken and people are not interested or willing to enter it, there's something going on, right? And so I see Mark standing, so maybe he's got something to add to that.
He
but
may,
if you
and
do-
I'll
but if you
answer
do
briefly,
too.
and I'm sure he has more information, but I think it comes down to dollars and cents. It's not a business that is going to make a great deal of money, because you have to keep it affordable enough for families to be able to afford childcare. And it's difficult to keep the employees because their income is so low.
Yeah, and just to maybe comment on that, and then Mark, you can certainly add too. That's always interesting to me because again, not that we like to look at the world this way, but sadly we kind of have to. There's a whole sect of society that makes more than enough money to ever care about childcare, right? And so if we're able to set prices high enough in childcares and you're still full, it's going to meet the demand, and that's going to work itself out through the whole pattern. I realize that's really going to hurt people at the lower end of the spectrum, and that's really the issue that we're going to run into. But to me, affordability versus demand is really going to be a market force. And so that's why because again, I got to think if you could open a daycare that could take 40 kids, people are going to pay. But that's not happening. So there's something going on. Mark, I don't know if you got more to add there.
A couple of insights there, members of the committee, Mr. Chair, and I love the work that the Child Care Committee does. It's very valuable to understand the greater context. What I've been able to pick up over the years, because child care is an economic development concern. It's definitely something that comes up at multiple times at every conference I've been at. It's the margins are very thin. The margins are very, very small. The burnout is very high. Often you have to, as a owner of the company, it's not just, well, this is my career for the next 30 or 40 years. It's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes a relatively young mother who's trying to solve her own problems, who is then finding themselves almost being forced to get into the childcare business. She didn't go to school for that. You know, to your example about being an accountant, she didn't go to school to being a childcare provider. You know, she doesn't have the business knowledge necessarily, or he doesn't have that business knowledge necessarily. To your comment about prices, Mr. Chair, at some point you price people out very quickly, whether they have money or don't have money, especially if you have more than one kid in childcare. That's where it becomes a very, you got to have enough income on that second income to pay for the 2 kids that are in childcare plus take home some money. Otherwise, what's the point of taking home money if you're just transferring it to your childcare? So that's where a fair number of people then say, whether in their 20s or 30s or whatever, or 40s, it's no longer logical for me to be in the workforce when I can just stay at home and it costs me less money. And that's not someone making $9 or $10 an hour. That's someone that could be making $30 or $40 or $50 or $60,000 a year in a good salary position, but they're paying thousands of dollars every month towards childcare. So it's not just one factor. It's often a combination of a half dozen things, and I think it's often difficult for government to know where they should put their finger, or if they should put their finger on what part of the scale to try and help. Is it infrastructure? Yes, absolutely. Is it wages? Absolutely. Do we really want to be in the business of setting the wage? Is that where we want to go? Infrastructure is not inexpensive. So do we then go just build a bunch of childcare centers? Well, then that public-private partnership has to succeed every time, or someone's going to say, see, you shouldn't have gotten in there. You shouldn't have done that. Why did you build that $1 million center? And then it fails because the partnership isn't there anymore. So there's a lot of things. There's another half dozen I could rattle off. There's just a lot of factors that play a role in the economics to make it work over and over again, or to successfully turn the tide.
And Alderwoman Olsen, I appreciate that. I'd love to sit and debate, because this is stuff that's interesting, and that's your committee's working very hard on this. But just one thing I'll add that last night I was at the school board meeting, and they got a report on enrollment and where they're headed, which is not necessarily a great picture right now. They're expecting to actually shrink a little, and there's a lot of factors that go along with that. But it makes your mind go down the path of, hey, when we're putting together a school, should there be a daycare at that same school? You get these sort of regionalized things around the city, because, that's what I was just thinking. Not that I'm headed this direction, but if I was and we wanted to build these, do you need one essentially in every area that an elementary is? Because you kind of want the kids before they go to school, and maybe the ones a few before and after school that would be there. But these are big, dynamic, market-driven questions, and I think back to that point, where does government step in? And a few places where I think government does need to step in. The first is way back at the beginning, and Scott, I appreciate the idea of, hey, those that choose not to go this route, and to Mark's point, that choose not to enter that second person into the workforce, we got to make sure it's affordable to live here in the first place. You know, if we can lower the cost of living for people, that decision is a little bit easier and it comes sooner to just have the second person stay home. There are good things with that. That doesn't help everybody though. That only helps a small sliver of society. And so then from there, we get into the next things of, okay, well, what could we do? Then it's low regulation, low tax, all the things that I keep talking about all along. They drive this area too, because entering this market, if you wanted to be a provider, back to Justin's questions, it's got to be easy. It's got to be flawless to just get it up and rolling. We got to make those things work. That to me is where government helps a lot. It's really hard to figure out where do we inject money, right? And that's why I'm glad the committee's looking at that. As council, we'll get that at some point, and we'll take a look at that. But that's the hard part, because you can again, like you said, West Fargo, we can spray a bunch of money all over the place. We don't know how it works, and it could cost us something. So I don't know if you want to comment on that. I know there's a couple others over here that want to.
Just to say that part of the reason that we haven't brought something to council in almost 2 years' time is that we have not been able to pinpoint what we believe
Yeah.
the city should participate in, other than getting the information out, which is why that document has been now made available. And, you know, as Kelly mentioned, it'll be on the MAC EDC website. It'll also be on the City of Minot website. We felt that that was an easy thing to do and, you know, very little cost to creating that. But we've really questioned, we were asked by the council a while back, you know, what direction do you want to go? Do you have a suggestion for us? And we were not able to come up with something at that point, because it is a balance in trying to find out what our role is, what is private business role, what is the school district's role, and we're not there yet.
Yeah. Jordan?
You know, Mark, you said it so much more polished and professional than I probably would have said it. My experience and looking at this, to what you said, why is this market broken? It boils down to two things. It's the regulation on the provider and the cost that the parents are willing to pay. And if an in-home center can only make you $40,000, $50,000 a year, well, there's a heck of a lot easier ways to make money than having a daycare. And so what I see is that the way to get around that is to scale up into a center. And now you're not a daycare provider anymore, you're a business manager, because you're basically running it's kind of like being a principal of an elementary school in a way, but it's obviously not a school, but I mean, you got administrative costs, you got to manage a business, you know, there's accounting, bookkeeping, things like that. Doesn't seem to be that many people that want to do that. I struggle a little bit wondering how we as a city can fix this, because I feel like so much of that regulation is not coming down from the city. It's coming down from the Department of Human Services or whoever in Bismarck, or the feds or whoever. Not an expert in that, but I do know a lot of that licensing is done at the state level and those inspections. And if that doesn't get easier, how do we fix it? In town, you can throw money at centers and do things like that, but if you're throwing money at something that's a very difficult way to make a living, I don't know that we're going to get the best bang for the buck. And I think part of this shows out in that, name me a city that doesn't have a daycare problem. I mean, it's everywhere. It's endemic. It's not even just North Dakota. It's everywhere in the country. We've gone from a society where, like, I went to daycare when I was a kid, and that doesn't exist anymore. And maybe it's easiest to fix in a small town. You know, my little podunk town I grew up in built a new school building, and they put a daycare in it. Velva, the city came together and they put a daycare in it. And you can do that in a small town and probably make it work if you only need one provider. I don't know that you can do that in a big city without building that into the function of the school district and putting them in multiple schools, and that they might not be able to carry that burden. It's a really difficult issue. I give you guys a lot of credit for taking it on because I'm not entirely sure how we fix it. And it's going to be a problem. And I'm with you. You take good quality potential employees out of the workforce because if you're spending $20,000+ a year on daycare, having a $50,000-$60,000 job's not worth it.
And I think you might even be underestimating it about 20,000.
I'm
because
thinking I am
think
too. I Googled
it's
it
somewhere
and,
about-
that seemed awfully low.
About $2,000 to $2,500 per child.
$2,000 per month?
Yes. To
Yeah,
$2,500
so
per child.
now
yes.
you're talking, if you got 2 kids in daycare, that's $50,000.
We
I
heard
mean-
a heartbreaking story from a couple who would be eligible for some daycare assistance.
Mm-hmm.
They had one child, they were happily married, they wanted to have another child, and they knew that they would not be able to qualify for any kind of assistance, and were seriously considering getting a divorce so that they could have another child
Yeah.
and be able to afford daycare. And that's a heartbreaking story. That isn't something that we should be hearing.
Right. And the one thing I will say, it seems like the centers that are out there, they do incredible things. Like the readiness that you see in kids that come through these things. I mean, when I went to daycare, I watched the Dukes of Hazzard and played outside. Like these kids are like, they're reading and doing all kinds of awesome things, but that's what comes with increased licensing. There's probably increased standards and the output is significant, but we're short. And so where does the government walk that line? And that I don't know that that's a city of Minot thing that we can solve.
Well, and I'll just answer to that. I mean, it's been much easier to find the problems than find the solutions. And that's why we're going to continue to meet. And if we have some solutions that we believe are something that the city should be considering, we're going to bring it forward and have a good discussion at that point and hope we can find some resolutions.
Well, and I appreciate it very much that you guys are, because while I may have a different view of how we would go about it in the end, and whether the city should be involved, I'm glad there's somebody having the discussion, because if it's impacting families, if it's impacting kids, and it's not working the way that it should, that's got to go somewhere. We need that discussion going on, so I'm glad that it's being had. Tyler.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this childcare and workforce shortage kind of go hand in hand. We know that. I just want to give some insight as far as, you mentioned what Watford City had done. Also, Stanley went through a process, and the Montreal County JDA has a grant that they provide their daycare facilities, and they're actually building a daycare facility right now in conjunction with the RWIP program through the Department of Commerce, as you mentioned. So it was a kind of a joint venture, private partnership. So again, another mechanism of how, not saying that should happen, but when you look at short-term problems, Keynesian theory, you got to solve short-term problems with short-term solutions. So, but that's what the city of Stanley did, very similar to what Watford City did. So again, with infinite resources from the city's behalf, we would do all these things, right? But it's up to council and a little bit of this committee to say, okay, childcare and workforce, do we go after that? Do we go after housing needs? Do we go after downtown? Do we go after new businesses? Do we go after cutting regulation and tax? That's kind of what we're dealt with. So again, another tool that we can throw in our toolbox and say, should we be doing this? And then, have to make some decisions of what we do. Mm-hmm. So.
One other note that I might add, I attended a Zoom meeting about a month ago related to childcare, and Brookings, South Dakota used many of their ARPA dollars to build a facility.
Sure.
Now, I think they had the plan in works, and we're waiting for the funding, and along comes COVID, and along comes ARPA money, and they had the dollars to spend. So that might be something that we consider too, that, we know what our goal is, and then we try to figure out if there's a funding source. So at this point, I don't know that we have the goal set for us.
Mr. Chairman, one more thought. This CBDG money or the resilience money, maybe a question for Mr. Lakefield, as far as there's any funds still available from the resilience cash that we got, and can that be utilized for daycare? I'm sure we'd have to write HUD and ask for a modification, but
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, when we talk about CDBG money, we have several different allocations and pools of money. The disaster recovery dollars, I would say, would not be able to be used for this because it wasn't an activity that was identified in the action plans. Some of those grants are almost expended, so there isn't funds available in there. And the NDR grant was a competitive application process, so it would require a change to go back in and introduce that as an activity. I'm not sure on the entitlement funds if that would be something that would be available, so that would take a little bit of research to determine that.
If I may, the entitlement funding could potentially, but you'd have to tie it to low to moderate income. You have to tie it back to the CDBG objectives, the national objectives, which is possible. The challenge, though, in my opinion, would be is even as an entitlement community, we're only getting about, was it like $330,000, $350,000 a year? So it's a drop in the bucket. And two, right now that funding is unstable with what's going on at the federal level. So we're not even sure how sustainable and reliable that funding is now and into the future. So that would be the challenge. Is I don't know if it's enough funding to make a significant difference, but it would potentially be eligible.
All right, anything else, committee?
All right, well, I appreciate your time. I am unable to stay for the remainder of the meeting. I'll watch it online and see how your discussion moves forward, but thank you for your time, and I'll be seeing all of you soon.
All right, thank you. Okay, committee. So any additional thoughts there? I mean, after each presentation, we've typically taken any notes if there's any that anybody wanted, but we're also about to move into the document itself now and start talking about recommendations. So we can certainly capture those there. But if there is something that we want to get down, we certainly can. I think, just giving my thoughts again, my first thought is always going to be towards, let's just make sure we're out of the way, first of all, right? That we're not making it any harder. That's the government's first task, I think, with most of these things, is make it as easy as we can. If we get all the way to the point where we're considering funding, we enter into a whole other world. Now, the interesting part is that we do a bunch of stuff economic development-wise with funding. And, while this might not be at the top of my list, it could be at the top of others. And so I don't want to throw that out either with the bathwater here, because when we have facade programs and wayfinding signage and all of that, maybe this does hit somewhere in that kind of hierarchy. I might wipe out all of them, but I'm not king. So that's where the discussion, I think, kind of starts. And so I don't want to lose this concept. And it sounds like the committee will have stuff for council anyway, so it's not going to be lost. But if there are things that really came to mind, I want to make sure we don't lose them. And right now, while it's fresh, is the best time to make sure we don't do that. So if there's anything anybody wants to add, I'm happy to hear it.
Mr.
Tyler?
Chairman, my thoughts exactly is, if this is something that, we know there's a mechanism out there, yeah, we could come up with a grant at the city level or economic development level to do a partnership, private-public partnership with a daycare facility that wanted to come to town. To do that, I'm not suggesting that we come up with more coffers and more dollars, but it's what are we gonna cut from these other programs? Or do we go away from the facade improvement? Do we say instead of $180,000 per project with the two sides, do we lower that dollar amount to $100,000? And some of that cost can come out of those coffers and go towards daycares. So those are some of the things I'd like to talk about in greater detail as we work through this document.
Okay. Jordan?
This is maybe just my personal opinion, and obviously it's not the opinion of the committee. When you put childcare versus facade versus wayfinding versus some of these other things, I think this is a more pressing issue. However, Lisa even brought up that the state appropriated money in '23, not all of it was used. Now, was it due to the fact that it didn't get marketed out there to those that would use it? Honestly, I hope that's the reason. My biggest fear is that the market is so distorted that there's nobody out to get that, because even with what's been put out there by the state, there aren't providers. Because the real cost to make this worth it is probably unbearable for a lot more people. I mean, if we're paying $2,000 a month for childcare and small providers can't make that work, what does the number have to be? And I'll be honest, I think that's really scary, because that's something that younger people are having to face. And I've had to realize I'm getting older, and I don't have any kids, but I got a brother that does, and he's lucky enough to have a very good job, and his wife was a teacher, and she just decided to stay home. And they live in West Fargo, where they spend a lot of money on, putting centers out there and whatever else, and it hasn't made a dent. And that's what I get really scared of with, if there was a solution that required funding from the city and it would make a significant difference, my vote would be you move that really highly up the food chain. I don't know that we're going to find one.
One of the things that comes to mind, and actually the group that we've got up here is a really great example for some of this stuff. When you think, you guys in the banking world, those of us, running businesses, you think of the best entrepreneurs in town, the people who really, if there's an idea and they're going to go get it done, they're not entering this, right? Because you talked about getting to scale, right? If you could get it to scale, probably can make money at $2,000 to $2,500 a kid. Right?
I've seen daycare centers that, generically they do very well.
Right.
If you scale it.
And we've seen the same. And, we've got some of those as clients, and you can get there. It's still a heavy task. You still got turnover. You still got people to deal with, all the things that go with that. But that's the part of this whole thing that I think seems to be broken, is that it's not viewed as something that is a big money maker and something you can put a ton of effort and time into. So yeah, go ahead, Melinda.
I will say, if this is, let's just say theoretically, since I own a practice, if I wanted to go down this path, I would say the risk is too high, to be honestly. One, financially, and two, because you can't get employees in that are paid well, trained well, and they're constantly flipping through, you can't guarantee that they're safely caring for those kids. So the risk is just really high.
Yep, exactly. And again, there's ways to mitigate that, whether it's insurance and training and all the things that go with it. But back to the point, if you're going to put that kind of effort in to make, $80,000 of profit this year, there's another way to go make that money, right? That's the thing. And again, when I look at it, just taking aside all the business hat and all that stuff, when I think of just sort of my what's best for families and kids and all those things, I think we'd all love to say, hey, it's better if we have a few more moms staying home or dads staying home, right? I think that's okay. That's a thought, but that's not reality today. Whether it's, going after the thing that the neighbor has, whether it's a boat or a cabin or whatever it is, the society's changed from when we were kids. And we're in a world now where this is sort of a necessity, but this whole market is now broken. And I don't know that there's a path out. And I don't know, I'm interested to see what the committee can bring to council to take a look at, because again, weighing all of it against all of the different types of spending that we're doing, I can't say that this couldn't find some priority somewhere. But that's against where we're at today. Harold?
I'm going to go out on a limb here and maybe go a little bit further than maybe I should as a city manager sometimes. But my personal opinion is the one piece that we've missed in this whole conversation is the private sector. This is a workforce issue. And if we're competing for workforce, part of the cost of that is if I have a young mother at home that has a degree in marketing and I need a marketing professional and they're qualified, why wouldn't I, as the potential employer, say, I need you well enough that I need you here doing marketing things, and I'm willing to cover the costs of your child being cared for so you can focus on doing what I need you to do? To me, that's the piece that is missing, and I don't know that I agree that it's government's responsibility to pay for that, with the exception of whether we're taking that approach to hire our own employees in the public sector, to hire police officers and engineers and planners and those types of things where we're the employer, then maybe we should provide that as a benefit to our employees. But I think that's the piece that's missing the most here, is that the employers had to participate in that. That's a cost. Culturally speaking, as a society and as a country, we used to have a country where there was one sole breadwinner for the household, right? So we've created this childcare issue by continuing to grow and not growing our workforce with it. And we've created a situation now that we need all adults in our country to work, but we're not paying the wages sufficiently to cover those costs. And to me, that's where the rub is. I agree with all the conversation that went on here today. I think everyone's speaking accurately and true, but the one piece of that is, what is the role of the private sector? And personally, I don't think it's government's responsibility to pay for that, at least not individually. And so in my opinion, until the private sector recognizes that and steps forward and is willing to pay for it, I don't think you find a solution to it. They either need to pay for the daycare or they need to pay the wages sufficient that those mothers and fathers can work and cover these costs.
Yeah, Michaela?
And Kelly and Scott, maybe I'm wrong, but wasn't there a bill passed in 2023 where you could, as an employer, enroll in a program where they covered, was it up to 300 matching funds?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it was parents, it's a pilot parent program. I can't think what it's called right now, but employers and the state and the employee, it's a three-part prong. The state pays a third, the employer pays a third, and the employee pays a third. And it's either $150 a month or $300 a month for each child. Problem is, there's not, the only real employer in the state that is really utilizing the program is the one who created it, Department of Commerce, state of North Dakota. So again, it goes back to that marketing piece. And also, if you're over a certain amount of income, you don't qualify. So that needs to be reviewed and looked at. The parent pilot program will continue through the next biennium, and from what I understand, and I don't know which bill it is off the top of my head, but they will be adding to that program. But the money's still sitting there because there's only 60 employers in the state that are using it.
Thanks, Kelly. Okay. Mark, you want the, oh. Yep.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, to city manager's point, I have heard that the employers that have the most success with the private sector buying in and either having a daycare on site or having more skin in the game are mid-size to large-size employers. And if you look at our community, you have two large employers, right? You have the military and you have Trinity Health. And then you have 3 or 4 layers of government. You have Minot Public Schools, you have City of Minot, you have Ward County, and then some of your next largest employers are under 300 employees. And I'm not saying that's a small company. We see that as a large company, but at some point the numbers have to pencil out. And so you have to have dozens of kids going through those programs, not 3 or 5 or 10 necessarily to start your own daycare program on site or to really lean in heavily. But to the city manager's point, there is a role for every last aspect of this to play. And I think there's something that all can do to try and help. But it's really not just it's not one big hole in the gap and we just have to plug it. There's 20 holes in this and we're trying to figure out which ones matter the most, so.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, good on that discussion for now? All right, let's turn our attention to 4.2 then, which is to start through the document. So I don't know, and Michaela, I don't know if it's easy for you to get a copy of the document. I should have mentioned this before, up on our screens in front of us, or if people have it with them. I just want to make sure that we're working from the same thing. Does everybody have it?
Which document do you
The-
want?
I want
The one that I did as the bullet points?
No,
or
this
the
one right here,
that
the
you
one
did?
that I sent, because I want to start moving through that.
Jennifer, did you want me to plug in or did you want to pull up the agenda? It would be, I believe, the second item on the agenda? If it's on the agenda, I can pull it. It is. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so the way that I want to go about this, at least at the beginning here, is there's a couple parts of this document that are just sort of housekeeping, just things that are background information to get to council about how we came about and the process that we've gone through. And so what I'd really like to do throughout, though, is have motions that sort of approve the entire thing. So, my first thought, if you do have it in front of you, and hopefully we'll have it on the screen here in just a second, we'll start with the committee background. And what I would do is I would just entertain a motion to approve that. And then while that motion is on the table, then we can do any amendments if we need to, if there's anything that we want to adjust. Perfect, she's got it. So what we're looking at right in front of us there, I'm talking about that entire first section called committee background. Again, hopefully I got my details right. I believe it was a 6-1 vote that created the committee at the October 7th meeting, because it was at the budget approval meeting that we did this. This was one of the things that I asked for coming out the back end of that. I asked the mayor to appoint 2 council members and 5 community members, and so that's where the 4 of you come in, plus Beth. And then Alderman Pittman was selected to join me, and that created our committee of 7. Okay, straightforward. We commenced our work November 8th. That was our first meeting, and we've met twice monthly since. We've had, presentations, Q&A sessions, and then there's been some working sessions in between where we've had that open discussion. And then Michaela has worked with us as our secretary. So is that, again, this should be easy part of this. I just want to make sure that we've got this down so that when we report back to council, we've kind of got a unified things that we're saying. So I would entertain a motion to approve that first committee background bullet.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move in item 1.
Okay?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on it, any adjustments that anybody wants to make?
Just a thought, and as I was looking at, do we want to be a little more descriptive on some of the meetings we had as far as, a list North Dakota Commerce, MACDC, do we want to, we had, the childcare, like today do we want to add that discussion in there, or I guess am I just overthinking it?
It's a good thought.
Yeah, I think-
Include all of the presentations, yeah.
Okay. So what we would want to do then, if you want to do that, we'll want to just make an amendment to the motion, which is perfect. And then we'll just want to add what those additional bullets will be. And we could turn those into bullets if we want. We can continue with the comment list or whatever we want to do. I think that the child care committee for sure is one that we can add because we just got that today. Okay. So do you want to make that a motion for that amendment, Justin? And we'll-
I make a motion to amend Tyler's motion to add more description to the meetings, all the different groups that we met with and the meetings, and whether that is, like I said, I was just really, that was my thought is do we want to be more descriptive there? So I don't know if it's best to have a bullet point of just every meeting, what we did, like the date and who we met with. I don't think it needs to be in great detail, but at least the whole city council will see that.
Sure.
And so,
Yeah.
so I guess my motion would be to list out our meetings, dates, and the general topic of that meeting.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
Okay, Jordan. Okay, so discussion on the amendment. So one thing that I'll add in this, I think we want to just stay at the right level of information here because the council will also have access to minutes, right? So we'll have a lot of that. We'll have the agendas. So I think this is good. It would be great if we can get those now and get them in here rather than trying to punt that for the next meeting. Because we could table this motion to have me take a crack at going through that. But if we just need to add a couple things, it'd be good to just get that part done.
I don't have a list of all of those that we met with.
Yeah, that's what I was
That's-
going
that's
through
the
my
hard
mind
part.
too. Is
I would forget.
yeah. Let's see here.
Would it be easier if we just table and you and I can work through the agendas and?
Yep. And so really, so actually what we could do, Justin, if you don't mind a friendly amendment to your amendment, which is just to direct the chair and Michaela to bring that adjustment to next meeting.
Yes, I'll make that amendment to my amendment motion.
All right, so the amendment that we, actually, let's do this. Let's back out of both motions and then bring that as a clean motion. So will you just drop your amendment?
Yes, I'll drop
Okay,
that.
and the original motion came from Tyler?
I make
Okay.
a motion to table.
So, okay, so you'll withdraw your original motion and make a motion to table with the direction for Michaela and I to bring that. Is there anything else we want to add to that? Was there anything else that anybody found in that portion? But I think this is good. I think getting a little more detail there would be good. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got Tyler's, it's a new clean motion now to direct the two, Michaela and I, to bring that back for next meeting. Is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
Okay, Justin will second. Any further discussion? Okay, call the roll. Are you good, Michaela?
Yeah, do you want to do all in favor, or do you want to?
Go ahead and do the roll.
Okay. Tyler,
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes.
Blessam,
Yes.
Hammer,
Yes.
Howe.
Yes.
Great. Motion carries. All right, so now on to section 2. So this, if you remember, what is economic development success? We had some discussion here, and it'd be great to have some more of that. But right now, what we've got is a list of that we had down of ideas. You know, here's different things. This, for me, this becomes a little bit of our thought back to council on what council should be thinking about in terms of success. Doesn't mean that we will do it that way, but the point of it would be, we want something that are a few things that that council would use as criteria when it's evaluating programs and evaluating decisions that come before us. Right now, I see this as more of a brainstormed quick list than a succinct set of bullets. And so with that in mind, certainly looking at this entire section, if there's adjustments to the wording and the sentences before or after, that's fine. But I would really like to hone this into a few distinct bullets, if that makes sense for anybody. Okay? So the best way for us to move through this is just through motions. So if somebody's got a motion to add, subtract, adjust one of the bullets, that would be in order.
Mr. Chairman, I'll start. I didn't see increase in jobs. I didn't see jobs in that list. So, bringing jobs to the community, adding jobs, however we want to word that. So, I would suggest adding that. I believe we already included here increasing discretionary spending. I'd like to keep that. Average pay is already in here. Increasing the average age of the labor force. I'm sorry, decreasing the average age of the labor force, I feel would be important. Housing starts, definitely important. Yeah, these are some other things. So I guess I'm adding items to the list.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have that in a motion for a bullet to be added right now? Was it?
You know, a lot of these things are in here, so why don't we just, I'd move to add create jobs to the list.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? Go ahead, Jordan.
Say, just a point of discussion, and I know we want to do this formally, but have we talked about maybe prioritizing some of these?
Yep,
You
and
know-
that's completely in order. So what I would suggest is as we get the bullet list, we're working towards getting finalized language. We also easily could then prioritize. And so what we could do then is put in the beginning sentences, this list is in priority order. And, we feel those at the top of the list are the most important, and the others may be still important, but less so. Okay?
Sure.
All right, so we've got a motion and a second to add increased jobs, is that what we said?
Yeah.
Okay? Any further? So Beth, just to kind of catch you where we're at.
So
Oh, we're
you're
in?
good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So we're in the second section now, which is what is economic development success, and we're working on those bullets, okay? And Tyler's got a motion right now to add increased job. It's numbers, right? Numbers of jobs.
Create, yeah.
Create
Increase
jobs.
or create, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Mark, did you have something you wanted to add?
Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate for me to come up during
bet.
discussion?
Yep.
Okay. I really appreciate the comment about jobs, because I think that there is a great conversation to be had. That is one potential measuring stick for economic development. I would also say that it's not the only one and not the most important at times. The state of North Dakota, Bank of North Dakota, about 5-6 years ago, included, along with jobs being a potential measuring stick, capital expenditures. So what's the CapEx of that? If someone came in with a $100 million facility, it would only needed 10 employees, but it was going to be a $50 million new addition on our property taxes. I would hope that we would say, boy, at a time when we've got 2% unemployment, I'm so grateful that we're adding a $50 million building onto our property tax roll when we only have to go find 10 employees. It's very fascinating to me, the pushback I get from people when I say, hey, we're excited about potentially bringing in a large employer, and they're like, where in the, are you going to find those employees?
And how different from the late 90s, right?
And yeah, what a fascinating, awesome difference, but still one that then rolls back onto this economic development success idea, in that, yes, we should be having jobs in our community, no doubt, because you never know in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years when you might be flipped upside down. And we no longer have that low unemployment. So you want to find long-term, stable, new wealth growing jobs. And that is to say, jobs that will bring in money that's outside the state. So to your point, Tyler, I don't know if there's a way to prioritize within this, like you already have in that conversation, or even to say, and or capital expenditures. Something that ties in those two to say, not every great business adds jobs, not every great business does capital expenditure, but usually they do one of those well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a point of diminishing return to where you can have a massive cash outlay on the behalf of the taxpayers that doesn't bring new jobs, right? Yeah, so I completely understand that. However, in this particular time, and in this short term, absolutely, create jobs probably isn't the thing we're after. It's at the bottom of the list. Workforce is at the top of the list. It's flipped upside down, like you indicated. So, but in the future, I think we will want more jobs in the community once the workforce shortage does heal itself.
More discussion? Okay, seeing none, call the roll.
Either.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Blessum.
Yes.
Feldner.
Yes.
Hammer.
Yes.
Howe.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Motion carries. Okay, so that we got that addition, and I don't know if Jennifer will be able to add these as we go, or if there's a way to go about that. But
I don't think it's a
probably
Word document, no.
Yep. So we'll make adjustments and we'll see these as they come onto the next one. Okay, what's next in this list? Other adjustments? Oh, Jennifer, actually stay up on that. We're going to continue in item 2 there.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I don't get to make motions or vote on anything, but one thing that I'm seeing missing here is maybe just attention to greater diversification of your fields. So, for example, if you're a community that's heavily reliant on a major industrial manufacturer, right? Well, when industry goes down and they start cutting or going out of business, if your whole economy is based solely on that, your community is up a creek without a paddle at that point. So the more you can diversify that and the balance between manufacturing and industry and commercial and even what I would even call professional services, headquarters of companies, those kinds of things, the more you can diversify that out, hopefully you're balancing it. And I would even include like education and military into that balance as well, because as the economy ebbs and flows, depending on what market is strong, if you can have one down but have a couple others up, that's healthier for your community. If I'm explaining that correctly, and I don't see anything in here that really kind of gets to that point of that greater diversification of businesses and employment opportunities within the community.
Well, I think to that thought process, you'll hear people say, well, what do we have going in the state? We have ag and we have energy. Scary part is a lot of times lately they've been moving the same direction. So when one's down, they're both down. And so how do you, to what you just said, you're absolutely correct. Like, what can we do to diversify away almost from both of them? You know, the thing that I've always seen sticks with me is so much eligibility for economic development funding is tied to primary sector economic development, which is ag and energy. So, you know, sometimes those, you know, we're putting a lot of the eggs in that basket because that is our bread and butter. But when our bread and butter's on the rocks, then that's a tool that we're putting a lot of focus in that's not really going to be available.
Mark?
Chairman, members of the committee, the term we often use is industry sectors. So if something were to say something like diverse industry sectors or diversifying industry sectors, and to Jordan's point, we don't have a long list of primary sectors, but that isn't to say that you couldn't attract new primary sector businesses, right? Manufacturing is a classic one that we just don't have a lot of in our region. There are other good hot spots across the state, but as a whole, even the entire state of North Dakota, we are pretty low on the overall manufacturing list. If we could find another place that, again, creates a lot of things that is sold outside the state, that brings new wealth in here, that helps our economic base. And to the city manager's point, it's currently missing on this list. It'd be one that we prioritize in our business is diverse industry sectors.
Okay, so is there a motion to add a bullet?
Mr. Chairman, I'll steal Mark's words. Sound smart. Diversify industry sectors. I'd make a motion to include that on the list.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any more discussion on that one? I think it makes sense, certainly. Okay, call the roll.
Neither,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Lessem,
Yes.
Feldner,
Yes.
Hammer,
Yes.
Howe.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Okay, continuing on.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick question. Is it okay to have a bunch of these items on there, or do we want to whittle a bunch of them off?
To me, that's what the committee's for. So whatever message we want to send to council is what we want this to look like at the end of this. So if there's a few that should be combined, could be cleaned out, that would be fine. Or if they're fine as is, I'm fine with that. Jordan?
I was just thinking the same thing, that there's probably a few of them in here that we can maybe come up with a way to combine them to clean it up a little bit. You know, I was looking at incentivizing business in Minot, retail and restaurant economic development, and data collection. There's probably some opportunities here to open this up. Competition would fall into that. And, you know, there's probably a way to cover 3 or 4 of these in one.
Okay.
Do I know
Is there a motion there?
No, I don't have a motion yet. The wheels are turning, but it's Friday afternoon. Need a little WD-40 in there or something.
Mr. Chair, I don't really like the term increased tax base. I understand what we're trying to say there, but I don't like the words tax base because that sounds very governmental focused and greedy. I think the important thing is that what we're trying to focus on is we're trying to increase the investment and the value of property within our community.
Correct, and I believe those were my words, so I would agree with you. That's where it was going. Not to, I mean, you talk about property taxes and increases, yeah, I'll read you loud and clear, so I would agree.
Okay,
Make a motion, we can strike that one.
okay.
Yeah.
Strike it, or do we want to change the wording?
I don't know how to change the, what would be a good, yeah.
Increase property values? I mean, is that?
I don't want to do that because then it sounds like the city's out to just raise property values and tax that. Not
we
the way
can do
that,
that anyway,
that's not the
right?
way the mechanism works, but, yeah, I don't want him.
I believe I got a letter in the mail last week.
I got a letter today, yeah, pitchforks coming out. No, I'm joking. Yeah,
So do we just want to strike it?
Okay.
I'm fine striking it, yeah.
Okay. Is there a second for that?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any discussion? Are we losing something by removing that? Is there a concept we were going for that was important?
It was more to, increase the tax base through through additional building or something like that, through, expanding the city, et cetera. Yeah, is what my thought process was when we originally put that on the list, but.
Well, and, like I was mentioning with watching the school board stuff last night, so many of these things are tied together, right? So the part of that discussion was the land that they're thinking about selling, and would that mean, 100 new single-family homes, which then allows more people to come to town? Part of the study that they had showed that there's a pretty good ratio you can count on for your number of housing starts that will directly drive how many kids you end up with in your schools. And it's reliable over a long period of time. And so these things all tie together, whether you call it population growth, you call it housing starts, you call it business starts, they all kind of play together in the market dynamics of the city. So I just want to make sure we're not losing something as we remove that. Because, this is the way it's talked about a lot. The tax base is, I referred to it on Monday during the finance director's presentation. We're seeing a little bit of that can help us in some ways.
I think at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to increase the lots and construction of facilities in your industrial, commercial, and residential areas of your community, right? You want continued growth and construction in those areas, which I think is what we were trying to get to with the tax base. But again, I just don't like the terminology tax base.
I guess the other way to think about it is are we catching those in other pieces?
Well, like using adding value to those, to those lots or acreage, whatever you want to call it,
Okay. All right. So the motion on the floor is to remove the bullet. So is there any more discussion?
Yeah, more discussion. I'll stick with that motion to remove it, and then I'll try to do some wordsmithing for next.
Okay, is the second, you agree, Justin?
Yes, I do.
All right, so it's withdrawn. All right, what else?
Sorry, as we're talking through these bullets, it does feel like maybe they could use some wordsmithing. I didn't realize that this was going to be the process you wanted to go through line by line.
Yep.
Could have done some homework and brought that to you, but I would almost move that we table this if everyone feels like the additions are correct, and then we can come back with maybe some suggested actual language if
Yep.
everyone's.
And again, once we finish a section, I'm not of the mind to say it's off limits as we continue our discussion. If we do something else below, it triggers something for a previous section, I don't have any issue with that. So it's not like we're done.
Yeah,
go ahead,
maybe we
Melinda.
just finding the right terms to describe
Yep.
this, like actual metrics, like per capita income and kind of some of those things maybe
Yep.
would be
And I think-
easier to measure.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the questions Tyler was asking me in previous meetings of how are we actually going to do this? And now maybe you're getting a better picture of what I'm intending here. So I think that sounds fine. So if you guys are fine there, what we can do is, so we're sitting right now at about 220. Let's go through the rest of the document just so you understand how I've got the rest of it laid out. The next section I've got then is section 3, which is primary recommendations. Okay, these to me are the bullets where we go to council and say, we're asking you to take these actions. So if there are very specific things that we believe the council could do right now to better our economic development worldview, then this is the section where those will go. And in section 4 is where we have the notes that we've taken so far. And my thought is other committee notes, we can leave those there. I don't have problems if the committee decides, hey, we all didn't really agree to this one. This was one person's thought, which some of those are mine right now because I put them on there later. We want to agree on all of them. So at some point, we'll finalize that list as well. But the idea right now is that list in number 3 is the primary recommendations we're asking council to consider. Okay? So if there are any of those that you guys would like to start on now, I'm certainly open to that.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Go ahead, Tyler.
We have 2 motions on the floor.
Oh, we do?
Well,
We're-
Yeah.
Beth had kind of
Sorry. Yeah.
maybe not. I wasn't quite sure if it was formal or not to table.
I wasn't
And so
sure either.
I didn't know if you were formally tabling and Hal was seconding when she kind of mentioned that.
And then, yeah, and the first motion was to scrap the increase the labor pool, and yeah, we haven't acted on that.
But I
And then,
believe the
yeah,
motion to table supersedes.
It does
that
supersedes, and we don't have to.
If, well, and was that a motion, Beth, that you're making, and Melinda, was that a second?
Do you feel that a motion is necessary, Chair?
Well, no, I guess here's where I'm at. What I was trying to bring is some semblance of where we're at in the document.
Sure.
I mean, if somebody said right now, hey, I just had the most perfect idea for how a bullet should be in section 3, I don't want to lose that, right? So I'm fine with us working anywhere, but if this makes more sense for the committee, we can table and move on from section 2 for today with the idea that we can revisit it anytime we like. Okay, if that's the motion, that's fine. Or if there's other work that we need to continue in section 2, that's fine.
Okay. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. I was just gonna say, I just wrote down spitballing, I could turn 5 of them into 2, you know, just with a sentence. But
Okay.
I wrote them down, so we
Yeah,
can
let's-
wait.
let's
Like,
clarify what-
are they perfect? Probably not. I just came up with them.
Let's
But
clarify where we're at. So Beth, did you want to table section 2 until we can think it through a little bit more and do some
Sure,
wordsmithing
yeah. I move that we table section 2 and come back with
with wording?
additional suggestions at our next meeting.
Okay.
I second.
All right. So any discussion on that? And Jordan, you can bring those during.
they'll
during
be
that.
right here.
Yeah,
there
this
you go.
this process is as I've been at the legislature most of today. They get a whole staff of counsel that comes back
I
with
know.
amendments. So it seems prudent that we have some time after this discussion to figure out our language.
Exactly. That sounds good. Okay, any other discussion on that motion? Michaela?
I will say too, if the committee would like, I don't even know if we should be discussing at this moment because we have a motion to table, but if the committee would like, you can give yourselves a deadline. You can submit them all to the city clerk. I've had other committees do this. And then I would share it out to the committee on your your personal recommendations, and then they can be brought forward at the next meeting. And maybe that would make it clearer, and they can be put on the agenda for everybody, so
And along those lines as well, I know, the Human Relations Committee, we would bring our versions of certain sections as we worked on them and distribute them to everybody. And, we could use one as a working copy or a different one as a working copy. To me, all of those are just fine. I do think though, it behooves us a little bit. And what is our next date? It'll be 11th. It
yeah,
behooves
there's an
us
extra week.
for the 11th, to try to do that if we can, to have that ready. How's the 11th look, Beth?
I don't know.
It's still during session, I know.
I don't know my schedule till the Thursday before the week. We can talk about that after.
Either way, the nice thing about it is that, like Michaela said, you could still distribute what your thoughts are. And so, and it's something that we could work from, because again, we're talking about honing bullets and again, this is what we're asking council to be thinking about in this section, not actions we're asking them to take. So I see this as maybe slightly less impactful than section 3. Okay? All right, any other discussion on the motion? Okay, call the roll.
Feldner,
Yes.
Hammer,
Yes.
Howe,
Yes.
neither,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Blessing.
Yes.
Motion to table passes.
Okay, so really for today then, what we've got left is there anything that we want to start on section 3 with primary recommendations? Is there any big idea that anybody wants to put forward now as a start to the discussion of how we get the items on there?
And
Go ahead, Justin.
you're looking for motions?
Yep,
again?
if you're ready for that, that's fine, or whatever works.
Just want to clarify. I think I'll start with, I'd like to make a motion that we put as a primary recommendation to add the economic development position back into the budget, which was cut for the 2025 budget.
Okay.
Did you say into the 2025 budget or
It
2026?
was cut out of the 2025 budget,
Oh.
sorry. 2026, added back in the 2026 budget.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All right, discussion.
Can I just make a point of order? So are we going to do everything through motion? Like there's no, I mean, I'm just wondering here, since this committee's been fired up, we've had, 3 months now of mostly presentations, and now we're gonna go right from presentations straight to motions. I'm just curious, like, are we gonna have a chance to, like, bandy about discussion? That's,
So I think it's a good point of order, and again, this is something to me that's up to the committee. I'll help to try to lead us, but we work together as a team to get to the final point. I'm perfectly fine with that. One of the reasons that we use the rules of order is that it actually orders how we do this stuff, right? So there might be an hour-long conversation on Justin's point, that, you know, he'll want to make his case for this particular one and why this matters and why the spending is the right way to go about things. And I think that's going to generate, I hope, a lot of that conversation. That's not to say that there couldn't be conversation outside of motions, but for me, that's usually the easiest way to keep order moving. That's my only thought.
okay. Yeah, the only reason I bring that up is because we're finally getting to a point where we're actually gonna have these discussions, and the first motion, which is no problem with making the motion, that's gonna bring up a lot of questions. So, okay.
Yep, and we, you know, right now, I mean, I definitely want to be done by about 3. You know, we may spend the next 35 minutes in this
Okay.
one motion. To me, this is what the committee is. It's this right here, because I think this is a good question, because this brings back all of our stuff around retail coach and all of the outside stuff. It hits actually the very first bullet, the filling gaps bullet, because one of the reasoning I remember for talking about this position before was there is stuff that we cannot expect MAC EDC to do because of their relationship with their member investors. And so this position raises that question, and it's the right place to talk about all of it. Okay, so just to make sure we're clear, Justin's got a motion. Was there a second to it? Did we get it? Feldner, okay. All right, so we're in discussion. So we definitely need all of it, Jordan, whatever's on your mind.
Sorry, for
Or if Tyler's
discussion,
ready.
can we reread the motion again?
Yep.
Yeah.
I put it as add the economic development position into the 2026 budget. Correct?
As long as,
Because I know it was removed from the 2025.
as
but-
long as, I guess, that's my motion, is to add that position
put it back
back
in.
into the budget that was cut, so.
And therefore hire it and put it in place. I mean, that's the idea. Yep.
So I seconded it so we can talk about it, of course. I don't know that I'm necessarily in line that that's a great idea. Only because I feel like we have a lot of duplicative responsibilities when we had that position full. And knowing that we're really looking at efficiency and what we can do, and at these dollars, I want to make sure that we understand who's responsible for what and what those roles are, and if it's truly necessary, so.
Mr. Chairman, that was my thoughts as well, what would the responsibilities of that position be? I think if we can start there and get the responsibilities of that position, we can continue discussion.
So Harold, would you mind talking through what the vision was when it was in the budget and how some of those interactions were intended?
So, as I understand, because I wasn't here when the position was created, I believe it went back to the IEDC report that was conducted, and that was one of the recommendations that came out of that IEDC report, that there was a gap there and that there needed to be more coordination, and that the city as an organization needed to have a position that was an expert in that area to facilitate those conversations and to help fill that gap from a city perspective. What we were using the position for primarily was administration of some of the programs, such as the Renaissance Zone, the Facade Improvement Program. That position was a key position in helping create the parameters of the Facade Improvement Program, doing a lot of downtown business relationships, conversations, connection, communication, that kind of stuff. The Economic Development Administrator position also served as the staff liaison and support to the Renaissance Board, and was the first point of contact for all things economic development with the city. So, for example, if MACDC was working on an RFP and they needed questions answered, or someone was responding to that RFP or was looking at relocating their business to the community, the first point of contact for the city would be that economic development position, who would then bring the necessary experts within the city to that conversation depending on what was needed. You know, Public Works for water sewer questions, you know, maybe the city engineer for logistics and streets, city manager and finance for conversations about TIF and those kinds of things. And then when I arrived, one of the things that I pushed for too, because one of the gaps I saw was being pretty aggressive in the retail recruitment sphere, developing the contract with Retail Coach, so we start having access to that data and utilize that data. And so, in my opinion, this position would be someone that would be the expert on ensuring that data is up to date, correct, and the lead on making sure that we're capitalizing and using that data to go forward. But I was pushing it particularly in the retail space. MACDC was leading on industrial and manufacturing primary sector. Of course, they wear a lot of hats, but there wasn't really in my opinion, a significant prioritization or effort being made with regards to retail recruitment, which would go back to the bullet point of becoming a strong regional draw. So who's talking to Sam's Club? Who's talking to Costco? Who's pulling that data? Where's that data coming from? You know, who's following up with the contacts every 3 months to see if you move forward with your decision, where you at with that? Can we get you to reconsider? You know, those kinds of things. That was some of the vision that I was trying to utilize that position for.
Mr. Chairman, and Harold, is Mr. Billingsley filling that role right now? In I would say triple capacity. Yeah, I know, and understanding where there's a lot of hats.
It's a combination of Mr. Billingsley and myself, more primarily probably Mr. Billingsley, but he also has all the daily responsibilities of being the community development director as well, and making sure that his staff is doing all that, supporting the Planning and Zoning Commission, all those kinds of things. But it will be Mr. Billingsley who will be attending the ICSC conference in Vegas this year, and he has done that the last couple of years in trying to make those those follow-ups and those connections there. He's the one who's trying to reach out and communicate with those potential leads and keep us up to date on where the progress is with those. And to be honest with you, I don't know that we're dedicating the time necessary to it to do it right.
Further discussion? Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Kind of give a little, I guess, I don't know if I want to call it defending my motion or not, but one thing that resonated with me a little bit when we were going through a lot of these discussions is there was that gap between, I think the Chamber of DC is doing a great job. I guess my motion's not taking anything away from them. The comment was made, we had the wrong person in the position. So there was a change made position. So I think that position's important. And just because you have the wrong person in there doesn't mean you eliminate, in my opinion, you don't eliminate the position. You eliminate the person and replace them and get somebody that's doing it. You know, we had a change in city manager. We didn't eliminate the city manager position. We hired a new city manager. So that's where my mind was going, and it was really going down that retail, restaurant, recruitment avenue that the chamber has a tough time handling.
Yeah,
I would agree. I feel like that position was already decided to be a need, and then it just didn't quite work out. And I think it would be huge for our city to have the right person in that position that is going to these conferences and presenting our city in a good, positive light. I think that's huge. I know he was one of the first people I reached out to when I was starting my business here in town, was calling the prior economic development coordinator. So.
Harold, when that position was in the budget, was it funded by sales tax?
Yes, that position was 100% funded through the economic development revenues through sales tax. Yes. And just to make sure we're clear, because I do agree with the point that was made here, and I wouldn't eliminate a position just to get rid of an individual that's a bad fit, because I do agree that you deal with the person and handle that as a disciplinary issue. So the individual retired and the position was vacant, and then we were going through the budget process. There were some questions about the need and the validity of it, both from a political standpoint and from some of the other economic development partners, and given the budget constraints, that's where the recommendation from me as the city manager came to eliminate that from the 2025 budget, hoping that this committee could then have this conversation that you're having now of what is the value of that, and should that be inserted back into the budget once we have buy-in that that's a need and a necessity, and to address some of Mrs. Feldner's concerns too about making sure that we all agree that it's a necessity. So,
And again, you know, where my mind goes to is that we've got at least the way we're structured today, we've got a pot of dollars that if we decide that that's the right pot of dollars, what's the best breakdown to get the most bang for the buck for the taxpayer, right? And that can be direct payments to business owners under certain programs. It can be staffing. There's a lot of ways to look at this, and if I think that's what the committee wants to also keep in mind here, because I'll tell you, I wouldn't support it on council as a general fund position. If it's an exchange for other spending we might be doing, at least I've got a discussion then, in my mind. But outside of that, that's where I would run into hard time there. Jordan?
So I'm going to take off my civil servant's hat and put back on my day job hat of CFO in a business. A couple years ago, we had about 20 FTEs in a small bank. And everybody hated everybody, and we are so short of this, that, and the other. But our efficiency ratio was about average. People get wore down. A couple years later, we got 23 FTEs. People are slightly happier. We got more coverage to do certain things. But our efficiency ratio went way out of whack. And now we're grappling with, okay, how do we fix that? In a private sector way, you got to grow. So my employer wants to grow so that we can cover those costs, because they don't come. You don't just add those positions and add all these fun things for free. And I'm sure that there are tasks that could be done more optimally with more people. But when I step outside of this building, that is not the attitude in this city, state, country right now. People are expecting less government, not more. I mean, I'm sure that there is, a place for it, but we come through 3 months of these meetings, and the first thing is to add cost. I mean, I put my CFO hat back on, and this is what I tell our people now when they want to add something that costs $60,000, $70,000. I say, well, how are we going to pay for it? And I think that's what you were just getting at, whether it's general fund. Are we going to expand, do something that is this going to bring us enough sales tax to pay for the position? Analysis of that might change my mind, but I'll be a little honest for those watching. Don't tar and feather me. I don't want to be like the one that comes out of this, because my phone's already blowing up from people probably watching this today saying, "Oh, we're going to add." I don't know if I can get there.
Okay. Tyler?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I have no problem with this proposed position. Going through, hey, welcome to our city. We have FlexPace, we have Renaissance Zone, we got a home builder tax credit, we got a TIF, we got facade improvement, we have these programs. Where I struggle is when this position goes out and tries to, recruit retail that conflicts with all of our other local citizens of Minot. For instance, say we're going after. If you ask the people of Minot what they want, do you want a Chick-fil-A? They'd say, yeah, we want a Chick-fil-A. So we're going out to recruit Chick-fil-A to compete with Popeyes and to compete with Slim Chickens, who are already here. I really struggle with that. Government trying to go out and recruit. So that's why I will be voting no on the motion.
More discussion? Mark, you got something to add?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, as these conversations have been happening over the last few months, we've been having the conversations internally. We feel like that the Chamber EDC is better positioned than we were 4 or 5 years ago. We didn't even exist 4 or 5 years ago as a Chamber EDC. We were 2 separate organizations. a Chamber of Commerce and an economic development organization. We've added staff. In combining those, we've been able to maximize and improve efficiencies. And we feel like that there's a fair amount of things, albeit maybe one of them that couldn't very well be done, which is retail recruitment, but a fair amount of things where we can step in and fill some of that gap that might be existing and be still a face of the city. I mean, the city does contract with us to do economic development and workforce development, and so we could be still maybe that first phone call for an entrepreneur like Melinda. Then we could still then champion, okay, these are the programs that are available. These are the people you should be talking to. We can make those introductions to the people that she would need to know. We feel like there's an opportunity for us to step up to the plate and do the bulk of this work.
Okay. Justin?
I guess I just want to clarify that this wasn't my number one priority. This
Sure.
was just on my list, right? So
Yep.
it wasn't like, I wasn't saying this is the most important thing to me. It was just the first thing I wrote down on my list. So there's more I have more on my list than just that one.
No, and that's good. And to be clear with everybody, I feel like we've had a good set of rapport within the committee.
Yeah.
These will get a little tougher now, right? Because now you've got to defend what you're saying, and people may not agree. I hope everybody sees all that as constructive. Whether we vote yes or we vote no, that's what the process is, right? Melinda?
I also think with this motion, just because it's stated add that position back in doesn't mean that we can't be creative with how we fund that position. So just saying that doesn't mean that maybe we need to look at, like you said, like is it general fund, or maybe we break off a piece of it from the facade program and have that support, So I think that just opens the discussion to make it a little more creative. Like, hey, is there need? There probably is need. It seems like it's been brought up several times, just to have that liaison between all the work that they do, which is fantastic, but to have somebody on the city also. But we just need to be more creative at how we spend that. It doesn't mean that we have to come up with new money. Like, let's shift things to support it if that's what we deem necessary.
Yeah, and back to Jordan's point a little bit, I mean, I think the public's been clear, whether it's the last election or to just the stuff that I still get, that they're tapped, right? So we definitely, anything that we're looking at, we need to at least have it be cost neutral and hopefully leave a little more in their pockets at the end of it. Okay, more discussion? All right, seeing none, take the roll.
Hammer,
Yes.
Howe,
Yes.
neither,
No.
Nelson,
No.
Blessum,
No.
Feldner,
No.
motion failed.
All right, motion failed. Okay, thank you. Next, any other thoughts? Items that people, Justin was willing to be the first, so now let's get rolling.
Well, I know we have a very short amount of time here. I don't think that this particular concern that I have is going to be ironed out today, and I would hope that we actually don't even make a motion on it today. But I have some serious concerns about the last two bullet points that were added, about reallocating economic development sales tax funds to the general fund to cover flood control and the other pieces. I'm very, very concerned about setting that precedent and moving dollars away from all of these things that we're talking about that we're trying to manage to fill infrastructure needs and gaps in other areas, and how quickly, if we continue to do that, we'll lose control of that and continue to reallocate. And I'm really not in favor of that. I don't like reading that in this document. I don't think that's where conversations in this committee, although I've been absent for quite a few, were leading us. And I'd like to start that discussion now, though I have no hope that we would finish that today.
Yep, and I'll address those because those were obviously ones that I added in. And as you mentioned, there were pieces that you missed along the way. So part of some of those have been raised, and I've talked about. Number one, the presentation that we had from the finance director lays out that within the Magic Fund guidelines, that flood control is a portion that can be used. With what we are facing infrastructure-wise with the different projects that we have, yeah, you can see it on the screen there. So that's actually an action the council could take with the next budget anyway. And so for me, it was a discussion that I think we should all have, again, when we're talking about, let's say, the roughly a little over $2 million that are going to come through the sales tax penny this year. what's the right allocation. So that's why that's there. The other one is maybe more out of the box thing.
Sure.
Okay, and so while I believe that it still should be a discussion, I think we should have that. Again, a motion easily could be here to strike those from the document.
Sure.
So that'll be fine at some point.
And just to continue sort of my train of thought, I think we sit in this committee room and it is streamed, although people keep trying to say, can I call you right now? And you can't. I'm live on Facebook. The conversations we've been having here are echoing outside of these chambers, and they are brought to me and questioned in the halls of the Capitol, in other committees, in other counties, about the conversations that we're having here. And I think we are currently, and at risk of doing so more strongly, echoing to outside development and outside people looking at Minot that we're actually not interested in economic development, and that we are not friendly to developers. We continue to question these programs in a way that it's really easy to look elsewhere if they're going to have to fight for these programs in our community. And understanding that we're hopefully going to get to this document here and get to a place where we all feel comfortable. But I think that particularly reallocating these funds would just be a big signal that we have a very different view, and there's wonderful other communities, and not everything is equal. We're not on equal playing fields with most of them. So those are my concerns, and I just want to make sure we have a really in-depth discussion about it.
No, I think that makes sense. Okay, so Jordan, do you have something?
And I was going to say, and I'm not ready to make a motion on this at this point, but is this a place for something where this committee challenges other departments to say, hey, identify a way that we can spur some development of 1 to 4 family construction in this town that's agreeable to the city, because this is a report to the council, that's agreeable to developers, all the stakeholders, so that we can get something moved together. Maybe the deal on Monday wasn't the right one. That was costly, but I don't think it's going to get cheaper. Or is it something like challenge the engineering department to turn the speed of getting building permits and those kinds of things to decrease that time frame by 20%, or set some kind of a metric? These are the things that we're not putting a fiscal note on them per se. Are there things that we can do? I don't want people watching to say that I'm anti-economic development, but because I'm not. But are there things that we can do that don't cost us money before we do the things that do? And some of it's just attitude. Some of it's finding process efficiencies, that kind of thing. But, versus just, here's $150,000 for your building frontage. But we're going to make it really difficult for you to do this or that or whatever your business is compared to Bismarck or Fargo or Williston or wherever else. I'm like I said, I'm not ready for a motion on that yet, but I feel like those are the conversations worth having, especially if the mindset is that we need to be frugal or at least mindful of what we're spending.
And to that point, Jordan, council approved a consultant to help to work with the city manager to look at efficiencies, to look at ways to get better. And the great thing about that is that they went through more of a train the trainer kind of methodology, so that we're bringing that kind of thinking in. Because not only should that be cost savings and efficiency, it also should be what you're getting at, which is we provide better service. I mean, that, we're able to move things through our processes much better. And those are the things that to me are the primary functions of government, is doing those and doing them well and efficiently. And so certainly those are certainly possible items that we can send to council to say, hey, we really think you should study a way to get these approvals down to 2 weeks instead of a month, or whatever that is. Those are definitely possibilities for what we could send to council. Okay, Tyler?
Mr. Chairman, to your point about what doesn't cost the city any money, it's the home builder tax credit, it's the Renaissance zone. Those don't cost the city any money. Now, you can argue that, yeah, we're not getting that tax up front. It's an opportunity cost. The city never had that money in the first place. So to say that we have to take what the city's losing in those property tax, discount programs and shove them back in the general fund, that doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. All right, so we're at 250. We don't have a motion right now. Is there, unless somebody's ready to move on something, we could take this opportunity to think, to come back on the 11th, I believe, of April.
Yes, did you want anything submitted beforehand? So do you have kind of a deadline?
I'm open to that with the committee, whatever works for you. What I would say is the Tuesday of that week, if you can figure out what that date is. If you do want something that Michaela would distribute to everybody, we can do it that way. If you bring it and hand it out to everybody, that's perfectly fine. Whatever works for you is fine with me. Really for any of this, if you have any motions, any additions, if you have a whole set of proposals that we can bring, that would be great. Okay?
So,
Tyler?
Mr. Chairman, again, you could provide those to
Michaela.
To Michaela, and then
Yep.
she will disperse those to everybody then.
Yep.
So I post the agenda usually Tuesdays or Wednesdays prior to, so if you could have them to me by April 8th, that's the Tuesday prior to the next meeting on the 11th.
I can do that.
Oh,
Sorry to redirect the conversation, but since I have no idea if I'll be able to be here on the 11th, I would like to make a motion to strike those two items from these recommendations for city council. Two things. The second one, I'm just not terribly in favor of allocating them to the flood control piece. I believe if that already remains within the city council's decision-making, I don't feel like it coming from this committee makes sense at this point, so that's my motion.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right, there's a lot to discuss on these two items. I am in agreement that I would like to see both them struck, so I'll be voting yes, but open to having the conversation at any time.
Yeah, and I'd echo that too. Is there different wording? That kind of caught me a little off guard too when I saw it at about 12:38 this afternoon when I was looking through this here. And is there a way to clarify, or is there another place for that? I mean, I'm open to having that discussion, but I'm with you. So,
Other discussion? Okay, so just to kind of give some background from me on where I'm at with these two, and I'm the one that put them in there. And just to be clear, they were in the version I sent before last meeting, so they were already there.
Right.
So it wasn't just today that they were there. For me, as I've been clear about with everybody, most of these programs I have a hard time with to start with. And to be honest with you, what I'm trying to do here is give some option to preserve them in my mind. Because when I look at Renaissance Zone programs like we had on Monday night, where we have a block over by the river that has 3 houses and 1 commercial building on it, that's still in the Renaissance Zone program, and we have a submission from 2013 that's suddenly asking for the dollars now, our programs are broken. And if we're not at least going to keep them up, then we need some mechanisms to protect the taxpayer. And so what I was looking for here was, and I understand what you're saying, Tyler, that, hey, it's an opportunity cost. At the same time, we're asking the taxpayers who are living here every day, using the services, doing all the things right, to continue to cover what that tax base growth that we all talk about is meant to do. And when that doesn't actually happen and translate into dollars that the people actually see, that's where we run into trouble. We've grown our tax base immensely in the last 20 years, and our property taxes are higher than ever. And so that's the situation that we find ourselves in. So as I'm facing the public and I'm facing the people that elected me, that's the conversations that I'm having. So as I mentioned, these 2 items were ways for me to get my mind to the point where I could palate having those there. I'm just being blunt. And so and that's fine, because that's what the committee does. And that's what I've said throughout. That's the beauty of doing a committee for this, because I'm only one voice. I'm only one vote on council. And the council will take the recommendations that we take, and we'll discuss them and we'll move through them. You know, I understand the idea that this, you know, in some ways says that Minot is not open for business. At the same time, I feel like the work that I'm doing to advocate for lower taxes and lower regulation and trying to make Minot a better place to live that way is what shows that I want to be open for business. Open for business doesn't have to be handouts. It can just be lower the price tag for everybody at once, and that's the intent. Jordan.
I think to what you just said, what I've seen happen in the past is that we have to have the handouts to make up for the burden, whether it be regulatory wise or just in general, to make these things work. We got to come back, and I don't envy you guys at the chamber EDCs. There's a lot of you know, we have to smooth things over, and that's what I'm getting at in my mindset of, and I don't know if there's specific ways for us to do that, but to become I mean there's a way to do it on the tax side, and that costs you some money. Obviously, if you cut property taxes, that's less money into government, and you have to, you know, reinvent yourself a little bit. But regulatory wise, slashing some regulations that cause heartburn for business owners or people looking to start a business. I mean, I'm not talking fiscal regulations. I'm talking like, you know, you need to have, I don't know, something in planning and zoning, for instance, and I'm not picking on them, but like, those are the easy things. I mean, I look at it in banking, you know, you can do whatever you want with the bank's tax rates or whatever else, but, you know, if you make our exams, you know, a little more straightforward and reduce the compliance burden, that in and of itself spurs growth in our industry. It's kind of the same thing in the government. If we make it more straightforward and easier to conduct business in town, how much horsepower can we get from that?
Tyler?
Mr. Chairman, to your point about, you know, the Renaissance program being broken in a sense, if there hasn't been an application in that area since 2013, I think we need to put pressure on the Renaissance Committee to say, hey, and that was actually going to be one of my recommendations, is you got to move these around. Number two, without a few of these programs in certain areas, you will not have, we say, yes, we're getting rid of your taxes for a 5-year period. However, we make that back 10 times over the next 30 years collecting taxes on that with that increase in tax base. Not only that, but yes, we're losing taxes for this amount of time. You're keeping contractors busy in your community. You have a $2-3 million build downtown that's giving contractors a way of life in our community. I don't think I would consider that a handout. I think it's not only that. When you look across the state and other communities that are doing it, we got to come to the table.
Yeah, and I understand that, you know, one of the things that I do think is interesting is that while there are those conversations that, you know, whether it's the words that I'm saying as an elected official or the directions our council has taken, you know, I found it interesting that during the debate on House Bill 1176, which is the governor's tax plan, when it was in the Senate Finance and Tax this week, there were members of that committee saying the exact same things I am. You know, why are we focusing so much on this when the local guys are just giving handouts to give the money away and not collect the property tax they should be in the first place? So there's conversations on all sides of this, and it's not just from people that might look at the world the way I do. That wasn't a close friend of mine in the legislature that's making that comment. That's someone else. So these are the kind of debates and I think real discussions that need to be happening across the state. And, you know, in some ways I got pushed back a little bit because I tried to have some of those conversations on the House side when they had that conversation. And I mentioned to them things like these programs. And one of my main focuses for them was that this is one of the main issues we've got. This is authorized under state law. We can certainly change it locally, but it does make us uncompetitive right away. It does leave us in a position where others, can make the case that, well, why would you go to Minot? You can come here and get this great thing for what you're doing. And so I think this is a conversation that really needs to be happening statewide, because the property tax burdens that are on the people have come to a head. They did last November, and a decision was made, and they're still boiling right below the surface right now. And we'll see where the legislature ends up, because this isn't done statewide. That's the interesting part. And so part of what we can do is to come to common sense solutions, I think, as a council, that tries to make these work the best way that we can. And so, again, we've got a motion. If there's more discussion, we'll definitely take it. Beth, I know it's a hard spot, because I don't, normally I would want to say, hey, let's table it. I can go for a little while longer as long as everybody's okay. I don't want to shorten this and not give it what it needs to have the discussion.
If the committee feels like that we should table it and continue the discussion, that's fine. I just, understanding that, these two bullets would make you comfortable with the rest of the program, and I hear you, and I can empathize with your position, and I just don't think that's fair to the economic development program to preserve it, but only if you give us a little bit of what's in there, and I just don't think that's fair to the discussion. I know where my vote is. If we decide to table it, that's fine.
Okay, Jordan?
The one thing I guess I would say as a bit of caution, and I'm going to take it in a little bit different, but it's not. Just because a program is performing poorly doesn't mean, as far as it being administered, doesn't mean we should necessarily throw it out. Maybe there's changes to make. Have you have a Renaissance Zone committee, maybe we need to change how we look at it, but I don't know if it means you throw the whole thing out. Here's a different example, but the same. I'm struggling to put together my Magic Fund report to the council, because I was half tempted to just hand you guys a blank piece of paper. We didn't meet last year. We talked about putting together metrics for economic success, not a single application. Seems to me that would be a pretty poor metric of economic performance if we have all this money in the Magic Fund and we're not using it. Because nobody wants it. Why does nobody want it? Is there reasons why businesses don't want to come to Minot? Is it attitude? Is it regulatory? Is it we don't have available space? We don't have housing? We don't have workforce? It's probably some of that and all of that. I don't know that because we didn't have a meeting last year, I would say just automatically get rid of the Magic Fund, but maybe there's things that we can do to rethink and prioritize where that money goes.
Okay. Additional discussion?
Sorry, just to go back to that, you're speaking about the Magic Fund, correct?
Yeah, that was my thoughts on the Magic Fund. But that's one program. Renaissance Zone is one program. There's all of that. I'm not sure, that I can go so far as to say, let's just get rid of it all.
Yeah.
I could, and then I'd move somewhere where I could see people coming from a long ways away, and I'll shoot my own food and grow my own fruit. I don't know,
Yeah, and I think too, just to kind of piggyback off of that, because a lot of thought about the Magic Fund has come up through this committee, and I know that's a separate topic, but Mark had mentioned too that the MAC EDC in its current form, with its current staff, 4 years they've had what I believe are the right people at the helm. And it just feels now like we're starting to get the attention of those people that would be asking for a few $1 million for large, giant builds. Yep. So then when you start to look at that, and as I'm in appropriations committee meetings at the Capitol, of course, the money that we have in the Magic Fund it's something. But if some of those big manufacturing things are come here, it'll be so little. And so yes, it's there, and we haven't used it, but I don't think there isn't potential for it. And I don't think that it's not a constant push from particularly the MAC EDC for those large projects that would use it. And I know that is a different topic than the motion that's on the table right now, but I hear what you're saying.
Dave, you have something to add?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I just want to point out that that itself is not a measure of maybe activity that is happening in the economic development realm in the community, just because the project hasn't come to the stage of the game where they're coming to ask for money or assistance of some type. Doesn't mean there isn't anything going on behind the scenes. So, and I think there is some things that are churning below the surface in the community that just haven't seen the light of day yet because they can't at this point. And that's part of the normal process that we go through. In addition to that, we've stood up a number of other programs in the recent past. The revolving loan fund, which was the latest application for economic development funding. So that's another vehicle that we are utilizing and leveraging state dollars through the Bank of North Dakota instead of doing a grant or something directly from the Magic Fund. So there's a lot of other things that are coming into play here as well. And coming off of the interest rate environment that we were in and being in the banker, when interest rates are 2 or 2.5 or 3%
Right.
in the market, there's less of a demand for other funding vehicles. So, as we get further into the interest rate environment that we are, or if things go higher, I would say that the demand for these types of things are going to increase along with that. So it's hard to connect the dots and say A causes B or B causes A when there's so many other influences that are out there.
And I think maybe I shouldn't have went this far. Like, I wasn't saying this to let's take and shift it from one program to the Magic Fund and debate the merits of the Magic Fund. That's not what I meant to do at all. More so, it was just looking at, are there things, are these programs functioning perfectly, generically? I would guess very few of them are. But what I'm saying, and weirdly enough, we go back and forth, and I would support where Beth's at this point. We can always add it back in if we so choose, but I'm not to the point where I think it's a good idea to just give up on some of these things. Are there things that we can do better? 100%. But that's probably not for this committee. It's more for this committee to challenge back to, hey, what action steps can we take so that these things are functioning and the taxpayers can see that they're getting something for their money.
Yeah. And one thing that I guess I'll add, right now, one of the things that we talked about throughout was, should this committee be a standing committee, right? And just meet monthly or whatever that is. And with that in mind, we have the Renaissance Zone Committee, we have the Magic Fund Committee, we've got all these other different committees. Mm-hmm. Should they be rolled together? Because you need common thought on all of this. And so a recommendation that's different than these, because again, while I was pointing out a couple things with the Renaissance Zone program that are a little bit, I think, awful right now, those are easily remedied. The Renaissance Zone Committee could make the changes that I was looking for right away. And we just had a meeting this week. So, I mean, there's, those things can come. And those recommendations are perfectly available to us here to say, let's be more agile. To Tyler's point, let's move blocks in and off more often. If we haven't had a project on a block in 2 years, it's time to try a different block, right? That's, I don't know what parameters we might have, if there's timelines or anything like that. But the point is that those are the types of things that we can bring as recommendations. The other thing that I'll just point out, and maybe we'll get to the end of the discussion on these motions, is another part of where I'm headed here is that we're constrained a little bit in terms of where the money can go with the next budget. Mm-hmm. The primary sector fund is full. In fact, at the end of 24, we were over the dollar amount, which means we have to allocate that somewhere else. We're almost full in the one that we use for FlexPace. We got a request for $250,000 out of it. That's not the only thing we can do in that bucket. But again, we're going to refill that again. But that was $1 million this year. That was almost half of the allocation that went into that bucket. We don't have anywhere to put it. At the same time that we're looking at now $125 million that's going to be coming through flood control in the next biennium that we have to provide a match for. And is $400,000, let's say, just throwing a number out there, any more than a drop in the bucket? Probably not. But at the same time, there's a reason that bucket is on the Magic Fund roster. It was added there, and the committee that put that together had a thought process in mind. So again, I'm not saying that these are anything other than my thoughts as someone who has been very clear about how they stand on these things, but that's why the committee works on this stuff together, because it's not just my views, it's our views. Okay, Beth?
As I hear you go through this, and I know the budget process is long, laborious, and just starting, and you're well voiced in it, I guess that's my concern, is that if that is already an option, if it's already an option with the money, I just don't feel like, and we are very smart, well-rounded people on this committee, if that's already an option and the city and council believes that that's a good fit and they already have the ability to do it, then I think it should remain there. And they already have that. I don't think it should be signaled from the Economic Development Review Committee to take it away from the programs. If it's already an option, we can let it sit and the budget process can go and that decision can be made.
I 100% agree with you. You can still do it.
And just to be clear on that, one thing that I want to be clear with the committee on though as well was that I hope that everybody understands the reasoning behind the committee existing in the first place. It was, as I've said from the beginning, it was to give a critical eye to everything that we're doing. This wasn't meant to be a set of cheerleaders to say, hey, not only is 2.1 million great, let's spend 10 million next year on economic development. Okay, so that was the genesis of where this committee was headed. That's not to say that a next committee couldn't. So I think the discussion is exactly what we should be doing. And so all I'm getting at is that making that recommendation to me shouldn't just be, oh no, we like economic development, so we're not going to do that. If we think it's a better mix than where we are today, I think we should consider it. But that's up to the whole committee to vote on, and we'll do that. But I just want to make sure that it's not just, oh no, they can do it anyway, so we don't need to do that. Well, they could have fixed the Renaissance zone blocks, and we'll probably bring a recommendation for that, right? Council could have already directed that. So we shouldn't be held off by the fact that council could already do it, because council's got a different set of views. We do need to come together with the time we've given. The other thing is too, I'm thinking we were getting closer to the end. We may have a long ways to go, and that's okay. If this lasts into June and July, that's okay. We do have to be a little careful if we want anything for this budget, because there's a timeline there. But this is good. And I think this is what everybody wanted for the discussion, right? We're getting into the real stuff. Melinda?
Yeah, I think it's been really nice up to this, just learning about all of the programs available. But I think it would be really nice to maybe take each of these programs and have a good discussion, spend a good amount of time on what we really feel about the Renaissance program or the facade, and really looking at the numbers, and then, because I think there's some room to shift funding for sure within, and then maybe we can make a better decision about if there's anything we should cut or move. I just feel like we haven't really done that.
And this can be fluid. Like I said, and maybe my mind moves ahead quicker because I have a picture of what I'm looking for anyway, but that's perfectly fine. We're going to move at the speed that the motions come at this point until we're done.
So, in the idea that a committee of cheerleaders, I really still feel strongly that that's not what this is. I think that the budget process, I know how much effort council spends on that for education and staff work and resources to make sure that they do at least have an idea of where those dollars are going. And that's not to say that I'm not looking at the economic development budget dollar for dollar. We are looking at where we're spending our efforts here in this committee today. I really strongly believe that city staff and council, which the new 3 members have very similar views on how dollars should be spent within the city and how to be more efficient. If that case is made, I just really trust the council to make that right decision. So that's where I'm coming from there. I don't want to be seen as just advocating for all economic development, but I just feel like I want them to spend the dollars the way they think they should be spent when it comes to the budget process after hearing where our priorities lie. I think that that's fair. And if it sounds like there's going to be an extra amount of dollars, they have to make that decision anyway, no matter what we do. They can't put it into programs that aren't getting spent down. The other piece about this committee, which has been a huge learning experience, but I don't want to forget that it's staff resources, it's chamber EDC time and energy spent for 2 hours on Fridays in this room to bring us details and to defend the work that they're doing, that they report to the city already pretty regularly and in all great detail about what they're doing. And it's all of our time as well. And I know I've been skipping, so I understand, but I don't want to skip. I want to be involved in this process. But they're not just meetings. There's a lot of resources and effort being brought into these meetings. So as we're thinking about how to spend our time, I just want to make sure that we're spending it well and as efficiently as possible.
All right, so we have a motion. Any further discussion? All right, call the roll.
Feldner? Oh,
Just to be clear, just clarify.
We should
the motion.
reread it.
The motion again?
the motion was to remove the two items under the additional items not yet discussed by the committee portion of the report.
Point of order.
Yep, go ahead.
I thought we also had a recent motion to table that.
We did never make a full
I
motion.
thought there was a motion and a second on tabling. Okay, never mind.
Yep. Okay, call the roll.
Feldner?
Yes.
Hammer?
Yes.
Howe?
Yes.
Neither?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Blessing.
No.
Motion passed.
Okay, I think that's probably a good breaking. So everybody has a good idea where we'll head next. Information into Michaela if you want something distributed by the 8th. Really on any of these points, it can be cleaning up the sections we've looked at. It can be ideas for bullet points there or things we haven't seen yet. Anything's possible at this point. So, and then we'll meet on the 11th and pick up where we're at. Sound good?
Yes. Would it be appropriate, Michaela, if you could send that note to us? In an
Oh, in the
email?
Word document?
Yeah, or just part of the email, just to remind us all we have a deadline and the parameters of what it's in.
Yes.
Thank you.
We have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everyone.